Hello, Herle Burlyites. Last week, I talked about an issue that's very close to my heart, social isolation, and the inability to connect with loved ones when that kind of contact is most critical. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, recognized immediately that these kinds of issues become dire during a pandemic, and they stepped up the ways in which they help. The TELUS Mobility for Good COVID-19 Emergency Response Program has delivered more than 10,000 smartphones and tablets, paired with $0 data plans to hundreds of nonprofit organizations across the country. Imagine that you're hospitalized without being able to speak to friends or family. This became a reality for many patients seeking support for mental illness when COVID hit. Canadians undergoing treatment at inpatient facilities were suddenly limited in connecting with their closest, most precious contacts. It was heartbreaking. But the TELUS COVID-19 Emergency Response Program was able to provide the phones and free data plans to reestablish the critical connections these patients needed. For outpatients, the story was similar and no less critical. As Dr. Nicole Wright, a psychologist at the Royal Ottawa Hospital, shared, the declaration of the pandemic left many who live alone and access care as outpatients entirely cut off from group-based care because they didn't have access to a phone with data. Through the Mobility for Good program, they are now able to quell the debilitating feeling of being alone by attending virtual group sessions, and that helps maintain their mental wellness. To read more about stories like this and to learn more, go to connectingcanadaforgood.ca. All right, it's time for the pod, Herle Burlyites. We have a really fascinating two-part podcast lined up for you. Part one is a true crime story, a tragedy, and a potential scandal all wrapped up in one. We have Paul Pango as our guest. I've been a particular fan of Paul's reporting these last months on the horrific Nova Scotia Massacre for the Halifax Examiner. Paul is a terrific investigative journalist who's authored 3 books on the Rcmp. He's also a former senior editor at the Globe and Mail, who now lives in Chester Basin, Nova Scotia. Lucky you. We're going to dive into this story, examining the implications for our justice system, for politicians, and the media. For part 2 of the pod, we'll bring on our political panel with Jenni, Byrne, and back from a harrowing week of camping, fending off mosquitoes, moose, and thunderstorms, Chris Ball. We'll pick up on that conversation with Paul. We'll also talk about the Wee scandal, and the Wee scandal, and the Wee scandal. Kielburger's in front of the House Committee. Trudeau in front of the House Finance Committee. After that, if there's still time and Jenni hasn't completely taken over the show, we'll chat about the layoffs at Global News and the state of Canadian journalism. Plus, we'll examine what's going on down south in Portland and other cities as protesters face off against federal agents. Is it all just part of President Trump's law and order theater in the run-up to November? Paul Pango, what a real thrill it is to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, nice to be here.
We're now into months and months of lockup. You're down there in Chester Basin. How have you passed your time during the lockup, and have you been okay?
Well, my motto is stay out of trouble, keep a low key. My wife is very happy. I mean, I did do an interview on radio about a month ago where I was trying to find out. I do this sort of, I've been doing this sort of investigative journalism performance art where I go on local talk show, the Rick Howe Show, and sort of troll for information I can't find on my own. So one of the things I did was I sort of invited the Hells Angels to call me because I needed some information. And I came out from the interview and there's a bit of delay on it. My wife was listening in the kitchen. She says, "Did I just hear you invite the Hells Angels to our house?" And I said, "Well," I've dealt with them in the past. They're actually pretty good guys. In the prison system, they're considered model citizens. And if you look at this story and the way it's unfolding, they're pretty well going to hold a parade for me if it's true. So I don't feel that sort of endangered.
Well, that is the most interesting story we've heard about keeping yourself going during COVID. Let's start off at the beginning of this story, if we could. I I'm not sure that everybody who listens to my show is as familiar with the facts of this epic police fail as you have described it. And I was wondering, Paul, if we could walk people through this in two chunks, starting with what we know for sure, and then starting with what we don't know for sure, but there's evidence and there's information and we suspect. So can you just, take your time, walk us through the chronology of what happened here?
Well, on Saturday night, April 18th, Gabriel Wortman, for some reason we don't know, a denturist from Halifax went not a little crazy and killed 13 people on Portapique Beach Road, which is near Truro, just west of Truro, on the way to New Brunswick. The 13, he set a number of places on fire, including 3 of his own places. He may or may not have been using phosphorus grenades on a couple of these things. He killed the people. One of the last people he shot drove up the road to Mounties who were sitting at the top of the road, told him a guy, he thought it was Gabe, in a police car, shot me. And then Wortman managed to escape by going across a field and across a dirt path called the Brown Loop and made his way off through the back roads to Debert, which is about a 20-minute ride. I timed it the other day. The way I went was 19 minutes. The way he went might be 22 or 23. And then he hid behind a welding shop for 6 hours. We don't know what he was doing there, parked in his car. Next morning, got up, went about 34 kilometers to the north, went to the house of Sean McLeod and Alana Jenkins, 2 federal jail guards, one in Spring Hill, one in Truro. He killed them, shot their neighbor, Tom Bagley, who was coming to see what was going on. Then he went out on the road. He killed 2 VON nurses who were on their way to work. One had stopped by the side of the road. He pulled up behind her in his mock police car, killed her friend when she came up to see what was going on. And then eventually made his way down through Truro and came into a confrontation, pulled up beside a police vehicle in near Shubenacadie, shot that guy, and then it confronted Constable Heidi Stevenson a little farther south from there at a traffic circle, rammed her car, shot her, shot a nearby a passerby, Joey Weber, took his car, went down another kilometer, went to another denturist place, Gina Goulet, shot her and her dog, stole his car, and then I don't know if his tank was empty. 24 kilometers later, he had to stop for gas. And this is 13 and a half hours after it all started. And oddly enough, a Mountie was in there getting gas. He was in a canine. I think he was the canine officer. And he had identified him. One thing led to another. He shot the Wortman dead, and the RCMP claimed they did a magnificent job.
Okay, so that is a straight up factual description of what happened. What are the things that make this case so curious?
Well, there's two ways of looking at this story. Like when I started out doing it, literally in the first hour, I started making some phone calls because nothing struck me as right. That nobody should be allowed to wander the roads of Nova Scotia for 13 and a half hours. Why wasn't he stopped? I started to learn some of the first shortcomings of what the RCMP did. I mean, they did nothing to get in front of this guy, nothing to set up a roadblock, didn't set out a provincial alert. All of this people knew. And the question becomes then, why did they do this? Like, what is going on in the background? And when I wrote my first story in Maclean's, the headline was the Nova Scotia Massacre encapsulates all that's wrong with the RCMP. I was wrong. It hardly encapsulated all that's wrong because they started proving there was even more things wrong that I could have even dreamed of. And one of these things was, a deep throat type person called me and told me one Saturday afternoon that there's something here they're hiding. They're feverishly trying to cover it up. This is back in the beginning of May. They're feverishly trying to cover it up because if you find out what this is, this will make the massacre will pale by comparison, which is hard to believe. And that has sort of motivated me and others to sort of charge forward and look at what could possibly be going on here.
Right. So let's just go through all the curiosities bit by bit. So when we say they didn't put out an alert, what does that mean?
Well, there's a provincial alert system that every cell phone will go off with a mad sound like and wake you up and tell you what's going on.
Which you will get normally if a child is missing, for example.
A child is missing. In fact, they had used it a couple of days earlier for an unrelated reason. It was like, whoa! It was a COVID warning, and it did come out on the Friday, I believe. And that was unique. We haven't heard one of those in a while. So they didn't set out any kind of alert. And when I started looking at this, a piece I did recently in the Halifax Examiner, started to look at what the timeline was. The RCMP gave 3 different timelines for when they arrived, when they got the first call and when they arrived, which is very curious. It's like they're making up a story and nobody can remember what the story's supposed to be. They're the police. They're supposed to know the facts. It's pretty well, you know what time the calls came in. It's all monitored. It's all there. They didn't know that. It's like they were fudging the timeline. So what happened? What were they?
Well, the 911 calls would tell. The 911 calls would tell us for sure. Why don't we know that from the 911 calls?
But they won't release the 911 calls.
They won't release the 911
calls. They won't release the 911 calls, and they've been basically hiding behind, we're conducting a serious investigation here. And this is the kicker, that they're saying that they're protecting the victims' families from any more trauma. And even yesterday, they said that we're protecting the shooter's girlfriend from any more trauma and stuff like that, which is bizarre. The issue is not protecting them from trauma. The issue is finding out what really happened here. I mean, when I started out, David, the first CBC interview I did on April 20th or whatever, I said, why was Heidi Stevenson where she was? She was by herself in a car. She'd been 13 years in the musical ride. She was a press liaison officer, school support officer, that kind of thing. She wasn't a hard-nosed cop. He had killed 18 people over the previous 12 or 13 hours. Was roaming around Nova Scotia. They knew it, but their communications, they weren't even on a single channel. They were all on different channels everywhere. Nobody knew what was going on. She walked into it. When I did that story, I had the mayor of Lunenburg attack me for being this insensitive, terrible person. Some family members I thought they were going to come and bust my door down because you shouldn't be saying this about our frontline officers, our first response officers. All I said was, this is not the way it's supposed to work. Now I'm at the point, like 10, 11 weeks later, all the families are basically on the same side as me. I mean, they're marching on the police stations. I had a call today from one of the family members at 8:00 this morning saying, I want to tell you that all the families support what you're doing now because we recognize that you're basically here to help us.
Yeah, that's pretty evident. So let's go back to the timeline for a second. So I'm trying to get to the significance of this. So first of all, from the time the RCMP first arrived on the scene and did not issue an alert and did not cordon off the area, how many people died after that?
Well, that's what I do. I break it into two massacres. There's really 2 massacres that happened. In the first massacre on Portapique Road, 13 people died. It's evident that the RCMP were there at some point while shooting was still going on. The first officers went down the road a bit, saw there was a problem. bodies on the road, backed up, and took up a position at the top of the road, which they thought was the only way out. Other officers congregated in that spot. At one point, tactical officers were there, tactically trained officers wanted to go down the road. A supervisor told them, you go down that road, it'll be your last shift in the RCMP. They didn't even try to contain this guy, attack him, find out what was going on. So we don't know how long they sat at the top of the road before they started to go down it. It sounds like it was quite a long time, because one of the people, Clinton Ellison, whose brother Corey was shot, was hiding in the woods for 3 hours, maybe 4 hours. We don't know, but a significant amount of time that he had frostbite, or he had some mild hypothermia. And he was being hunted by Wertman. Wertman had a flashlight and was trying to hunt him down in the woods. This is a memorable interview from the first day. Then the RCMP didn't do anything during the night. They may have conducted some searches of the properties, but the Amherst police, a nearby local force, were told, oh, this is a murder-suicide. Nobody knows where this assumption came from or why. They had no idea where he was. He had gotten away. The next day, the second massacre happens. They know who he is. They know he's in a police car. All night, they're putting out alerts at 1 o'clock in the morning about this, but be on the lookout for him. Not hunt him down, not put up roadblock. Oh, if you happen to see this guy who's killed 13 people, give us a call. Do not approach him. He may be armed. That's basically what they were saying.
To the public.
To the public and other police. This is from the Truro police logs, where they're saying, be on the lookout for, now he may be driving this. And finally, around 8 o'clock in the morning, they put out one and says, alert, he is in a replica police car and he's armed. Well, we pretty well know that, because from the time he killed the 13 people by midnight the night before. I mean, it's just absolutely, like there's incompetence, and then this is such a level of incompetence, it's Olympic caliber. I mean, you can't be that incompetent just on your own. There's something else going on. It has to be.
So the RCMP, I gather from your story that the RCMP at no point in this process put themselves deliberately in harm's way and attempted to save anybody from this shooter.
Well,
is that correct?
Yeah, one of the precepts of law is that you get into a critical incident. Critical incident management, the first priority is the preservation of life. Be you a cop, any other kind of peace officer, a corrections officer, that's their operating precept. You preserve lives first. That's what you do. At no point in this did the RCMP try to get in front of Wertman and preserve lives. I've had one staff sergeant say, well, Heidi Stevenson did that. She tried to get in front of him. Well, I don't even know if she knew that was him, what was going on. I'm not confident that she was fully instructed what she was doing, because she was easily sort of rammed, pulled out of her car, and shot. The RCMP says, oh, well, she took shots at him. Well, I've seen the pictures. I've heard witness evidence. I don't think she was pulled out of her car and shot on the ground. She didn't have much of a chance. The poor woman shouldn't have been in that place. And I feel badly for her. She may be a hero for being a police officer, but she shouldn't have been there.
Sorry, the rest of the police, you talk about incompetence, but that doesn't really feel even possible at this level. So was it a tactic or strategy not to confront him? And if so, a tactic or strategy toward what end? Or was it just cowardice?
I don't believe it was, it's hard to know what cowardice is. If you said, I had there's a headline in a Halifax Examiner piece I wrote 2 months ago where it said the RCMP is cowering behind inside a cone of silence. And RCMP staff sergeants from all over called up, we do not cower, we are the RCMP. I'm saying, what happened there? You didn't do anything. You never tried to get in front. So you have to ask, is there miscommunication? Is it incompetence? Was it COVID-19? what was going on here? But that's where you start to arrive at these other more sinister sort of things. Was Wortman, did he have a special relationship with the police? Was he a confidential informant? Some suggest that he was a secret auxiliary policeman. There was some sort of relationship with the RCMP. And so I've been investigating that for 2.5 months while everyone else is looking at, as I call it, the monster story, how bad a guy he is. And so I look at the police side of it, and then we've made some progress in that area.
You believe he was a confidential informant?
I don't know. There's all kinds of strange things that suggest. Police experts tell me that a lot of what has happened have the hallmarks of a confidential informant or some kind of undercover operation. And that what happened at the end of this is like an undercover operation gone bad. I had a call last night and this morning from a former undercover operator who said this is, to him, clearly an undercover operation gone bad. Because one of the things that when that happens, their manual is don't alert other police forces. Handle it all on your own. Try to deal with the situation and contain the situation. That absolutely describes what happened. Truro Police are a highly trained force, small, like 30, 36 members or whatever. They're 20 minutes away. They were never called. Amherst Police, same thing, 24 members. They were already geared up, ready to go. Never got a call. But the RCMP were bringing in members from Moncton and Fredericton to come and deal with this, an hour to 3 hours away at speed.
And why? What's in New Brunswick?
Well, there's Mounties. So they called in Mounties from New Brunswick. Oddly enough, they didn't call in the helicopter the Mounties have in New Brunswick, which is in Moncton, which is probably 15 minutes by air to Portapique Beach because it's just across the water. The whole situation here, and it's never really been discussed in the media, but it's where the story, I'm confident where the story is going to go. This entire operation, if it was an undercover operation, was being run out of New Brunswick. And that Wortman, my suspicion has long been that Wortman is an asset of the RCMP in New Brunswick. We're sort of flying under the radar here while Nova Scotia and Ottawa take care of this thing. So that's a complication that hasn't been explored yet.
Where does the money and the Brinks trucks fit into this?
Well, Stephen Marr from Maclean's, who I've worked with on this story and continue to work with, Stephen heard that from a source that Wortman had received $1 million shortly days before the shooting and had it delivered by a Brinks truck to his denturist office on Portland Street in Dartmouth. Subsequently, I heard from another source that was $500,000. And no matter how we tried to track this down, we couldn't locate it. So I did some of my performance art on radio and explained the problem. And the next day I got a call from someone saying, it was actually $475,000 and there's videotape. You can imagine my delight. So
right.
How do I get the videotape? It took about a week of negotiation. No money changed hands. And I eventually got the videotape showing him getting the money from a Brinks depot at 19 Nilsley Avenue in Dartmouth.
So in cash?
In cash, $475,000 in $100 bills. And he got that money. And then the RCMP, we asked them to explain it prior to publication. And 2 days later, we did a story on how the money was routed, that it came through CIBC in Tria, which is the ATM stuffer for the CIBC bank and does that kind of money movement. How do you get money out, put it through in Tria, pick it up at Brinks? The RCMP said, he made a withdrawal from his personal accounts, and this is a normal practice. It would behoove me to hear any of your listeners, audience, who can tell me how to do this as well, if they've ever done it, because we still haven't found anyone who's done this before. But
they're alleging this was his personal money. They're alleging that this denturist in Truro had $500,000 in a bank account?
In cash. And Well, they're also, that this on top of this, it's alleged that in his will,
people in Truro pay too much for teeth work.
No, he's not in Truro. He's in Dartmouth. He's in Halifax. But he had
Dartmouth. All right, okay.
But he did all his work pretty well. All his work was done in cash, so he had a lot of cash, anyways. We have that from reliable sources. But the RCMP, what happened when we found out about the cash? We also managed to get the undercover handbook from the RCMP, which was yay. A scoop for us. Because in the undercover handbook, what it said was the RCMP can lie about undercover operations to everyone except a properly impaneled judge, which is important in the telling of this future story. So they can lie to anyone. So now you're talking about Wordman. They've gone on the record saying Wordman wasn't a confidential informant. Curiously, Superintendent Darren Campbell said at one point, words to the effect, we could find no evidence that he was a confidential informant, which is what I call the Ted Bundy defense. When Ted Bundy was asked, did you kill those girls? He says, there's no evidence.
Right.
And so we know that we have to strongly suspect there's something going on here, not only at this point that he's a confidential informant, because I wondered to myself, why would he be a confidential informant? He's a denturist. Who could he inform on? When I started looking around at what was going on in the biker world, and I got some tips from some knowledgeable people in that world on both sides of the law, that one of the things bikers would want from denturists are molds, presses that you make molds and pills with, drugs that you could cut with other drugs. He had access to all this stuff. And even laughing gas, which apparently bikers like to use at their parties. I've never been to one.
Yes, you have.
I can't imagine how that would go. And but there's that kind of connection. And if you look at the timeline between Wordman starting to go off the rails and crazy things happening, it dovetails perfectly with the beginnings of these biker arrests just prior to him in February doing some strange things. Around the same time in February and afterwards in March, in the days leading up to the shooting, arrests of Hells Angels and Hells Angels puppet clubs for the Red Devils are made on a regular basis. And a lot of those things, we don't know what's happened in those cases yet.
So you think maybe he thought his cover was blown? I'm wondering what caused him to go rogue all of a sudden.
The feeling is, one of the things in looking at some of the search warrants I've seen associated with the biker arrests is the RCMP in their wisdom highlighted the presses, highlighted a number of things that, bikers aren't stupid. I mean, they would look at it and say, who's the rat? And why are they highlighting these things? Where did we get these things from? If it's traced back to Wordman, then he's a dead man. If it's been conveyed to him that they know he's the guy, that would pretty well send him off the rails. Like the story the RCMP has tried to perpetuate is that this is a misogynist guy who's had a fight with his girlfriend and went crazy. Doesn't scan for me, doesn't scan for a lot of feminists. Yeah, if you're, I have no time for misogynists. I'm an uber sort of feminist. I support everyone. I want everyone to rise up. This case does not meet the standard. If he wanted to kill his girlfriend, normally in this kind of a case, you kill her first and then kill everyone else. Scorched earth policy. You don't do scorched earth and then come back and save her for the end. It doesn't work that way. So there's something else going on here. And I think his cover was blown. He was increasingly under pressure. He realized his life as he knew he was dead, that he felt betrayed by the RCMP. I've written this, and there's a plausible scenario that a number of police people agree with, that his sort of, the RCMP said he was a injustice collector, that people who did bad things to him, he went and shot them. But this whole thing was, if you look at it, it's plausible that he was targeting the RCMP. He had an RCMP car that may have been part of some sort of Mr. Big sting or something they were doing together. It all went rogue. It went back. It went south. So he's used the car, the uniform, everything to hurt the RCMP in ways that were unimaginable and horrible. And now the RCMP is completely caught up because it's going from the outset. They knew what was going on, I think. They knew he was in the car. They were doing everything not to tip their hand, try to bring him in without this really getting out. I think that's what they were trying to do. I suspect he may have had a radio in the car, and they were communicating.
With the RCMP during this period of time?
I suspect highly, because that is, what was he doing for 6 hours in Byrne? If he had a radio, they probably might not be able to scan that where he was, as opposed to a cell phone, which he apparently didn't have, which they could triangulate. And then whatever he was doing, they didn't want to get in front of him. Seasoned RCMP and other police that I've talked to, it seems to them that they were trying to bring him in, that they were talking to him. They didn't want this to get out. Finally, they couldn't avoid it any longer at 8:30 or 9 o'clock on the Sunday morning when he was popping off people on Plains Road in Byrne, innocent people, killing them, that he was on the loose. But even then, they didn't want to set off a big alarm. They were trying to bring him in. And the last thing, David, on this is the curious thing the Halifax Examiner reported way back a couple of months ago, that Halifax police set up a roadblock on the 102 south of the airport, which means what they're going to allow him to go to the airport since he was coming to the north. And their instructions were, capture him alive, don't shoot him. What was that about? There's been no explanation, and that's why we need a public inquiry. There's so many questions here that are absolutely beyond the realm. If you wrote this in a book, a fiction book, it'd be unbelievable.
Before we move on to the inquiry, which I just want to ask you one last thing about this issue, which is some documents, some court documents that had been redacted became unredacted yesterday, in part because of a lawsuit, an injunction that you had sought along with other media outlets. Did we learn anything new yesterday in this new material?
Well, not really. I mean, it's been kicking around from the beginning that he was a cigarette smuggler, that he had to grow up. Like, the journalists know this. They had to grow up, that he associated with criminals like ex-bikers and ex-MS-13 guy on his road, Peter Allen Griffin. We knew that he was sexually perverse. There's all kinds of stories people know about that. Most have not been published. What came out of this for me was sort of the gilding of the monster story. But I think it's a very useful story in two ways. One, who told him this? Was it his wife or his father? Both of them were talking. We don't know what his common law wife, Lisa Banfield, did. Her story doesn't make sense. The police are protecting her. But the story that came out yesterday has a very useful sort of point in dealing with the confidential informant stuff. Police I've talked to, former police I've talked to, have speculated that he was involved in all kinds of criminal activity. He got caught probably bringing stuff across the border because he's regularly bringing stuff in from Maine. I believe he had a property in Maine. He had a post office box in Maine. He probably got caught doing something. The police jammed him up, said, you do this, or you're going to jail. They turned him into a CI or some kind of informant. And that led down the road to where we are now. So what they told us yesterday actually fits the CI story, if you look at it that way.
So I would expect that if I phoned the police, phoned the RCMP and said, listen, my neighbor is killing people and burning them, and he has secret rooms in his house and a stash of weapons on his property, and then they did nothing to investigate that, and then he subsequently killed and burned me, there's going to be some lawsuits out of this, aren't there?
Well, there's going to be lots of lawsuits. I've talked to the lawyers recently about what's going on. They're quite delighted in their own perverse way about what's happening. But the story yesterday, getting back to the story yesterday, you just actually twigged something in my memory. They said he had all of these things going on. He was burning bodies. He was doing this. He had secret places, went on and on and on. Lindsay Jones, the freelancer for the Globe and Mail, showed me pictures, photographs, like 30 or 40 photographs she took of the properties on Portapique Road and Orchard Beach Road after the killings and before they were bulldozed down, showing the things from everyday life all around the property, etc. It was burned out, but a lot of it was still okay. You could see it. Things around it. Nothing. It didn't even look like it had been investigated. And then they bulldoze it all down. Why? The previous cases like the pig farm murders out in BC or Mayor Thorpe or whatever, Mounties went to, spent a year digging for bones, digging for this. This, they bulldozed down right after and let reporters wander around the property beforehand. Tell me, do you think this smells?
Right.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, so that gets to accountability and transparency. So instead of setting up a public inquiry, the federal and provincial governments decided to establish an internal review. And that's all melting down now, so we'll get to that in a second. But can you just quickly tell my listeners what the difference is between this review and a public inquiry?
Well, a review, you're not allowed to call any witnesses. You have no real powers. You're basically, whatever documents are given to you, you review and make sure procedures are followed correctly. A judge is at the head of it, Mr. Justice McDonald, but he has no more powers than you and I have if we were running the inquiry. Curiously, you have Anne McClellan there, former justice minister and advisor to the prime minister, mysteriously appointed to this. I have my suspicions about it, which would take another complete show to talk about. And you have a former police chief.
Well, I take some comfort in the fact that she's there, Paul, because I know her and she's extremely qualified to do something like this. And she's a person of, in my experience, somebody who takes her integrity pretty seriously. I sort of hope that Anne will blow the whistle. It looks like they'll move to a public inquiry before that. But before that, my hope was that Anne would blow the whistle on this review process and call for an inquiry. Well,
as we talked about it previously in a private conversation, I've seen Ms. McClellan's handiwork in another inquiry years ago where I detailed 6 chapters on what went wrong with that inquiry and how it was covered up. And she set up that inquiry, and she's part of this inquiry now. And as I'm getting back to the undercover handbook, what did I tell you earlier on? The key thing in the undercover handbook was the RCMP does not have to tell anyone anything. They can lie to anyone but a judge acting in a proper capacity. Judge McDonald is a judge, but he's no more a judge than you or I are in this situation. So this smells of a cover-up. I'm sorry your friend, Ms. McClellan, may be a heroine to you, but if she had any integrity, if Judge McDonald had any integrity, if former Chief Leanne Fitch had any integrity, they'd say, I would never accept this assignment because there's nothing I can do. In fact, if something comes up, the police, they have to clear it with the police if the RCMP wants them to hear this stuff. And finally, David, you have to get back to this thing about Nova Scotia and the federal government. One of the problems with the RCMP is the lack of accountability. Over the years, the force has basically surfed the seams of the boundary between provincial and federal governments and basically avoids any sort of accountability. In this case, the RCMP are hired by the provincial government, as they are in the provinces outside of Ontario and Quebec, to do provincial and municipal policing. But the province has very little control over them. In this situation, you would think the province should be holding the inquiry, but they can't. From the get-go, I was told by sources close to the top that Ottawa was insisting there will be no inquiry. This is coming from Ottawa. Today, Mark Fury, the Justice Minister or Public Safety Minister in Nova Scotia, is saying If Ottawa wants an inquiry, we'll have an inquiry. He keeps saying it's Ottawa, and it is Ottawa. They have to cover, because this is such an egregious event. Whatever happened, when we finally get to the bottom of it, it basically is the death knell of the RCMP as we know it, because it's under attack as a provincial police force, the contract police force in BC, Alberta, Nova Scotia. People are not happy with this police force as it is. Its own internal reports say it's unsustainable and has a broken culture. That hasn't changed. It can't do the job. And now this means that something has to be done. And I think what the federal government, one of the things they're doing is protecting something egregious. On the other, there's this whole notion this is a Canadian institution that has to be saved. But I think it's reached the point after 100 and whatever, 35 or 40 years, that something, it just can't keep up with the times. It's archaic. It needs to be changed. And the time has come. And this is probably the thing that should, sort of the one event that should be investigated and thoroughly investigated and used as a force for change in a positive way.
Okay, well, politicians in Nova Scotia seem to be folding on this internal review thing quite rapidly. The Liberal caucus members are showing an unusual amount of independence suddenly on this point, the federal Liberal caucus members. And as you said, the provincial minister has already said he would prefer a public inquiry. So it seems that that's the way it's headed. Is that the sentiment in Nova Scotia? Is this, I know that people are demonstrating in the streets, but is this, you talk about the end of the RCMP, is this something people in Nova Scotia are quite seized with?
I think that it's really has grown. I've sort of been, when I started out doing this, I was alone. I was actually very fearful for my safety. And my whole, and in COVID, you have to, just to look at this, the COVID thing has caused a problem because there's no media here. Nobody's traveling here, so there's no one here to do the story. So I've taken it upon myself. Stephen Marr from Maclean's, who's from Nova Scotia, has taken it upon himself basically to be here. And we're trying to get it out. And it's slowly built. Now there's all kinds of people coming on side. And they're seeing the fraud of what the government and the RCMP have done. They've sort of taken this position that, we're looking after the families. We're the tender, gentle feminists. We want a feminist view on this. And domestic violence is terrible. And everyone sees through the ball. And it's growing.
It's pretty hard to sustain that when the families are demanding the inquiry.
Well, they weren't at first. They were going along. Now you have the families marching on the RCMP office in Bible Hill the other day. I think the message is getting a little ugly, that I think the government and the police are getting to see that, geez, people are a little more, how should we say, woke on this, for lack of a better word. And I had a conversation this morning. The husband, Nick Beaton, who's leading a lot of this, I'd never talked to him until this morning. He called me at 8 o'clock this morning and said he wanted to just tell me that, he thanked me for the stuff I had done. I said, there's no thanks. I'm just doing what I think is right. And he says, I'm not giving up. And I want more and more people involved. And I think that's what they're up against. There's a determination now that they're not going to be bought off. They've lost loved ones. They know that, he said this, it was really important, and I've heard others say it. He said at the beginning, the RCMP seemed like the nice guys, and then they just basically treated us like trash. And we can't get anything out of them now. And we think he was a confidential informant. They're hiding this. We want to get to the bottom for not only for us, but for the people of Canada and find out what really happened. So I think the politicians have a problem.
And you actually think this may result in Premier McNeil starting to set up a Nova Scotia police force?
Well, it's hard to do. I think it's going to come about no matter what. The RCMP cannot sustain itself. This is inevitable.
I'm told that the provinces don't pay the full freight for the RCMP policing. Is it too expensive to set up your own policing?
Well, it is somewhat expensive, but they're doing it in Surrey now, and they're going to plow ahead in Surrey and take the initial hit because the RCMP gives you a 10% discount for municipal policing and 25% discount for federal policing, but you get what you pay for. there's rampant allegations of under-policing throughout the province, including in Colchester County where this happened. And then the RCMP plays games with its police. It's uncooperative. It's not accountable. The government can't do anything. The government can't even find out who's running the force in any given town. They can't find out. They won't cooperate with other police. The RCMP, this is one of the great sort of jokes about it. The RCMP considers itself a superior police force. When anyone in policing in Canada knows the municipal police forces all do a better job and are safer places to work and are much better at it. But in the RCMP, you know what they call the police in Truro and Amherst or Leduc or any of those places across Canada, the municipal police forces? Leduc, I think it's RCMP. I take that back. The clown police. They're the clown police and we're the RCMP because we know how to do it. Well, hell. I've just seen what happened in Nova Scotia, and they clearly don't know what they're doing.
To close off here, Paul, could I just take a couple of steps back? I mean, you have devoted substantial chunks of your life to researching the RCMP. You've written 3 books on this subject. It's fair to say, I think, that you've emerged from that with a fairly jaundiced view of the force. Aside from the Nova Scotia incident, what is behind your view of the RCMP? What is your view of the RCMP?
Well, I think that the RCMP, I feel badly for the members on the street because they're working in a system that is unworkable. It's not a very good system. They don't tell me about it. I'm not jaundiced so much as I'm frustrated by the fact that, you have Canadians across the country who refuse to see this force for what it is. If you look at it critically, you'll say, this does not work. This is the proverbial camel is a racehorse designed by a committee. It doesn't do the job. But people, they'll say 80% of Canadians support the RCMP, which I have said in the past is based on fond memories of the musical ride and nothing else. People who are policed by the RCMP see it quite differently. And if you took a survey of people in the communities where the RCMP police, it wouldn't be 80% because you got all those people from Ontario and Quebec who have no idea what the RCMP is. So I don't hate the RCMP like they would like to say. I'm concerned about the public. I'm concerned about the public interest. And the RCMP, I've been arguing for years, is dangerous to its own members and it's dangerous to the public because of the way it operates. That's what I'm saying. And we need to fix it. And politicians have to wake up and look at this force, what has happened to this force. And the key thing that's happened to the RCMP, beginning with the MacDonald Commission, back in the early 80s, is politicization of the force. So the force now has become this cumbersome, unresponsive, upstairs, downstairs kind of police force that doesn't make sense in the modern world. Things have changed. And they still think they're the cavalry. They're regimental. They think they're the army. They're not. In a modern society, we need a better kind of police force. And now with all this pressure going on to reform police forces, it's the proper time to do this with the RCMP.
What's the leadership of the RCMP like? Do they have good leaders? Do they have strong management? I was kind of taken aback to hear the new head of the RCMP say that she didn't believe there was systemic racism in the RCMP, which made me believe she at least didn't have much sense of what was going on the ground in the prairies. But what's your sense of the leadership of the RCMP?
The leadership has been politicized. It's the best people aren't chosen. Politicians, again, have chosen people for, since the problems of the RCMP began with, back in the late 70s and early 80s, it's been about politicization, putting the right person in the job who's going to fix it. So, when people came up for promotion back in the 80s, Zaccardelli's going to fix it. Because Chrétien wanted a guy in the 90s from Quebec. Well, he didn't do well.
You are really getting close to the bone here, Paul. Really getting close to the bone with Zaccardelli.
Then we'll have a civilian, Bill Elliott, who is basically a counterintelligence agent. He comes in. No, he didn't work out. That didn't work out. So now we'll have an Army guy, Paulson. Well, geez, that didn't work out in spades. Now we're going to have Lucky, who I said would have to be Lucky to fix the forest when she was appointed. What hasn't been reported about Lucky, and I had a senior executive level member, ex-member, put this to me the other day. He says, in the interviews for commissioner this time, Lucky was number 6 on the finalist list. But the Prime Minister picked her out because he wanted a woman in charge of the RCMP, because a woman's tender touch will fix everything that's wrong with the RCMP. And as I said at the time, she'd need more than luck to do that.
Great. Paul, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your expertise about this. It's fascinating. It's a scary story because you need to have more confidence and trust in police than this. We delegate so much authority to them, and we, to quote A Few Good Men, they're the ones that are on that wall. We need them on that wall, but you got to believe in their processes and in their good intentions.
Well, the last thing, this is so bad now. Like, nobody trusts the RCMP here. And I was wondering how far the story had gone, like if people really understood what was going on. Last week, we had 3 window cleaners come in here, from Bridgewater, where they work. And, every year they come and clean all the windows in the house. And they walked in, and it's all done under my wife's name, which is McNamara. So I don't think they have any idea who I am. And they walk in the door and they go, "You've been mighty busy." And they started reciting the stories to me. And they said, "We know what you've been doing." And so does everyone else, it seems. And I'm quite happy about that.
So I want to say that I'm sure that there has been a lot of media doing good work on this subject. I know that I've read pieces from the CBC and I've read pieces from Maclean's, and I'm aware of Stephen Mahar's work. But so much of this has been carried by the Halifax Examiner, which is an independent media outlet in Halifax. Halifax is a city that is not well served by print media anymore. So I presume the Halifax Examiner is filling an important role. And if we're going to ultimately have good coverage of this issue right through the end of a public inquiry, it will likely be the Halifax Examiner that's doing a lot of the pushing. So, Paul, how would people support that organization if they wanted to financially support it?
I think you just go online and subscribe and take out a subscription. And I think Tim Bousquet is doing a hell of a job putting this together and highlighting stories that have to be done. I mean, it's really sad what's going on with the Chronicle Herald and other newspapers across the country. I mean, the Examiner is doing what you can do with an online newspaper. The story length doesn't matter. You can fill all the space you want to tell the story. I did the story the other day on the chronology. It was 6,000 words long. You couldn't get that in a newspaper. But I was able to tell the story from beginning to end. And the other problem is, and maybe we can briefly touch on this, I wrote in the previous article to that, the problem with the position that the legacy papers have taken is that they don't report on, they don't use confidential sources. Everyone has to speak on the record. So this story has really been, so they've handcuffed themselves because this is a story potentially about confidential informants and police and government, and they're demanding that everyone speak on the record. Oh, and Hell's Angels, I forgot them. Who's going to speak on the record? I'm dealing with competent people, and I have to use my journalistic instincts and my integrity and ethics to tell a story that's honest. And the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star and CBC and them are saying, well, we got to have people on the record. We can't take these off the record things. They're not off the record, confidential. They can't be a source. They have to name themselves to have the courage to step up. Yahoo, that's really nice when you're sitting in Toronto and talking to your book club about all the good things you did at work, but that's not journalism.
Well, given the conversation we've had, I'd just like to say to all the Herle Burlyites out here that if I'm not here next week, please contact an authority, but not the RCMP. Paul, thanks for coming on. Fantastic to talk to you. I would like to extend an invitation to you to come back on as this issue progresses, because I suspect that there will be a public inquiry, and I suspect the revelations will be shocking even on the basis of what we know now. So it'd be great to talk again.
Yeah, and hopefully by then I'll have a Hell's Angel or two as a friend.
Stay safe is all I'll say.
Thank you very much. You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Call anytime.
Bye. If we've learned anything over the past few weeks, it's that in times of crisis, governments matter. So if you've never heard of Queen's Park Today, it's one of Ontario's most trusted news sources for political insiders and for people who actually need to know what is happening at the legislature every day. Whether it affects your business, your stakeholders, or the health and safety of your family, Queen's Park Today is tracking the ongoing developments in Ontario. The newsletter lands in your inbox first thing every morning, so you can start your day off already ahead of the game. During a crisis, the importance of governments increases dramatically. The only way to really get the detailed boots-on-the-ground coverage you need is by subscribing to Queen's Park Today. There's also BC Today and Alberta Today, which are great for people who want to know what's going on out west, but don't have the time to follow it closely. To get a free 2-week trial of Queen's Park Today, BC Today, or Alberta Today, go to politicstoday.news and hit the free trial button. That's politicstoday.news/free trial. Jenni, Chris, great to have you here. Thanks for joining us for the panel today.
Thank you.
Hello.
I normally ask everybody how they've been doing, but this week Regis Philbin died. And I was a big Regis fan, and Regis used to open up his morning show by asking Kathy Lee what she'd done the night before. So I'm going to ask you that, Jenni. What did you do last night?
Well, it was it's my best friend's birthday today, Lynette, and we went to the Keg, and I had my wedge salad. And I woke up today, and it's like Christmas Day. The Kielburgers are going to do the first of their 4 hours of testimony. I just watched over half of it, and the Habs and the Leafs are playing an exhibition game. So life is good.
Absolutely. Chris, what did you do last night?
It was a quiet one. There was no wedge salad on my menu. I talked to a friend of mine about possibly doing a food pop-up in the next couple of weeks because I do a lot of cooking stuff. And then sat at home and watched some Toronto Blue Jays baseball and hopes that, Toronto will end up the season 8-2 at the end of the 10-game season that I feel like the MLB will end up having.
Exactly. The last team standing wins the championship. Hey, Chris, can you, in one sentence, tell me what are your feelings about the Keg?
What are my feelings about the Keg? I feel like they do a decent steak.
Jenni loves the Keg. Jenni likes to eat at the Keg, and
I
it's
know
a little bit of a
I get that impression
difference between us.
I get that impression.
Yeah.
I think, it's a decent place to get a decent steak and a really large frozen margarita. Whether or not that's my particular, how I like to roll, I'm gonna probably go with no. So I won't see you tonight at the Keg, Jenni. Sorry.
Well, I'm not going back to the Keg tonight.
All right, fine.
Where are you going to watch the game, Jenni?
I'll watch it.
It is opening night of the NHL season, Habs versus Leafs. Jenni and I both have our gear on. Where are you watching the game?
I'll either watch it here. I might get together with my cousin, but there's really nowhere to go. Like, it's not like very few of the patios have TVs set up. The Keg actually does. But I'll probably end up just watching it at home.
Yeah. Me too. But I will drink a second rum and Coke for every one I drink, just to imagine that I'm sitting with you.
Aw, that's so sweet.
Yeah, it will turn out badly, as it often does.
Should I turn my texting off or something? I'm going to get some weird texting later.
All right. Where are we? So I only saw the first hour of the Winklevi today. You saw 2 hours of it. Where are we at a couple hours into this testimony today? Jenny, you start.
Oh, you want me to start? Okay. I was going to say Chris could start. I got lots to say. I'm going to be read like long-winded. I think today on this. I think it's a very bizarre committee. I think the Kielburgers come across as very arrogant. They've got a very. I think obviously they think that having a very unlit connect, one iPad between the two of them, and having poor lighting will mean that the media aren't going to play clips of that, and it's not going to happen. I think what's the most interesting thing is we pretty much are the same. We're the same place as what we were as of today. There's still so many unanswered questions, and when I turned it off, one of the things that the media or the opposition were going, and this was all parties. It's varying degrees. You have the NDP focusing more on their charitable stuff. You have some of the NDP, Peter Julian, just before I turned it off, was focusing more on the payment. And so the question remains now that no one in the government and the Kielburgers can't answer is, so we was selected, the charity, as to be the only delivery mechanism to be able to deliver this, program. But there had to be essentially a shell company, which seems to be a corporate entity, although we's trying to say it's another charity, where the money went to deliver the money. So why was that the case? Another question that needs to be answered is we found out this week that we got 33 million up front. I think they ended up getting 32 million, and they said they're going to come back and pay the government back. But what does that even mean? And at first we thought they were going to get 21.5 million to administer the program. Then it became 43 million last year. So what is this 43 million? So I don't think the 2.5 hours of testimony that I watched today, I don't think it's cleared anything up. And in fact, the Kielburgers showed up so ill-prepared in terms of information they knew that were going to be asked in terms of the government. And I'm being long-winded. I've got lots to say, but I want Chris to jump in, and then we can come back to it. What we also found out is that there were at least $167,000 in expenses on top of the $300,000 that were given in speaking fees to the in terms of the Trudeaus in expenses, admittedly since 2015. So none of the Trudeaus were paid for the work they did, minus I believe Sophie for one, until Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister of Canada. So there's my first unload.
All right, Chris, what was your takeaway from today's testimony?
So first off, the Kielburgers and Justin Trudeau seem to be from the same school of acting, or they have that sort of like breathless, like verbal sleep apnea thing happening. And I'm not, and I find it quite off-putting, and I find it just kind of reinforces again some of the stuff that we were talking about before about this kind of being a scandal that reinforces smugness and entitledness and all this other stuff. So anybody who hears Trudeau speak in that breathless voice, they hear that from Craig Kielburger and they go, oh my God, please stop. I think one of the really interesting pieces was actually before the Kielburgers spoke today was the former chair, Ms. Douglas, and her experience with WE. And I think having a bit of that inside view of how things really operate really helps to kind of blow apart the government's assertion that WE was the best and only organization to do this, right? So if you even just go by Ms. Douglas's testimony, they certainly aren't the best organization necessarily to have done this. They have this Byzantine structure that I have no idea. They're setting up, they don't like the word shell corporation, although Charlie Angus loves that word, and I think it should be used a lot more. They called it a holding company, but a shell holds something, so we'll just split the difference, still call it a shell company. They're
one's more pejorative, one's more deliberately pejorative,
fine,
and
I do, but I'm trying to get in there. And so they're not sharing financials with the board. They're about to lay off a whole whack of people, and the minute that the chair of the board starts asking questions, all of a sudden the founder, not somebody who actually is necessarily somebody who has a fiduciary responsibility in the company, calls and says, hey, it's time to go. So you have somebody on the inside asking questions who's no longer a part of the organization and asked by one of the co-founders to go. So I wouldn't call that the best organization necessarily to make this work. And then the only organization, there's still no evidence that they are the only organization to do this. They are the only organization that seems to be paying, liberal folks to do speaking events and, give them $500,000 in expenses. Or was it $200,000 we learned today in expenses that they paid back. So, they are the only organization that seems to be doing that for folks. But I don't think that we're at the end of this. I don't think we have the smoking gun yet. But again, it doesn't reach that best and only threshold that we're told that, we supposedly meets.
Well, and there's more and more things that came out today. The Kielburgers got dragged down the rabbit hole. They are a multi-million-dollar organization. So they on the books, we think that they own, the Me to We Corporation owns close to $50 million in real estate assets. They obviously have spent a lot of time dealing with this government to their own admission, and they have no registered lobbyists. They aren't registered to lobby. And, they were asked about, and Sophia Marquet is who they said was their government relations person, but she didn't just deal with the government; she dealt with stakeholders. And so, pressed by this, and they were pressed quite heavily by Charlie Angus on this, is that they were saying, well, she's more of a stakeholder person than a GR person. But if you actually look anywhere in the listings, she's the manager of government relations and stakeholders. And one would say, based on the fact that the closeness of this government in terms of doing this issue, she would have spent more than 7.5 hours a week in communicating with government. And it sounds like the Kielburgers did too, which means they've illegally lobbied. And it was evident in terms of talking to the Kielburgers, they didn't understand that because they kept going back to, well, we don't get that much government money outside of this program, which we're not making any profit on because we're just doing it out of the goodness of our heart. But they don't realize that other charities like the Heart and Stroke Foundation, for example, who get a lot less money or in some cases no money. When the whole debate on the decriminalization of prostitution was taking place, there were women's organizations who were coming on the Hill to speak on both sides of things, and they were registered to lobby. They weren't coming to the government to get money. They were coming to the government to push their position or to let decision makers know how they felt. And so there just seems to be a complete lack of understanding and compliance in an organization that is seemingly so big and self-righteous.
Okay, there's other angles to this besides the parliamentary committee, but I just want to say one thing about the parliamentary committee watching it today and my reaction to watching it is I think, unlike the two of you, I have appeared before a parliamentary committee. I was dragged there in 2005 by the Conservative opposition and some asswipe that was a disaffected Chrétien staffer. And, I didn't know this before I went there, but it is nothing that resembles a fact-finding exercise. The partisan nature of the questioning turns it into an adversarial talking point exercise. And I'll be honest with you, I realized that partway through my appearance, and I just started to blow the whole thing up. I stopped treating them as if they were parliamentarians and started jousting with them as if they were you or me, as if they were either one of you two sitting here with me. And finally, the committee chair said to me, Mr. Herle, you should give committee members more respect. And I said, Mr. Chairman, I'm giving them as much respect as they're giving me.
Okay, but David, so you're saying there's no, not to take away from your experience, you're saying that committee members, which, by the way, except for the Liberals and Elizabeth May, are all on the same page. This is one of these rare moments where you see the three other opposition parties who may be going down different angles. They all want answers to this. Are you saying that a government committee can't ask? And as for partisanship, you have opposition MPs that are asking to get answers, and they're getting no answers. They're getting stonewalled. They're getting, we'll get back to you. And you have a committee chair, Wayne Easter, who at one point, I think when he was throwing the questions to the Kielburgers, referred to Mark Kielburger as Marky. This is the reason why, if you're an opposition MP, you're getting frustrated by not getting any answers because of the close connection between the Liberal government and we. And there was another thing, and I brought it up. We talked about it in the pre-call. Is one of the things that they said was that no intermediary for the Kielburgers have had a conversation with anyone in the PMO. Well, I've been in the PMO when organizations were struggling. In fact, before McCain during listeriosis and Schneider's brought in a ringer to help them manage the issue, it was a
thank you, Jenny.
They had a couple lobby firms in Ottawa who were reaching out to me on a daily basis to try to plead their case. And that's all public because I testified. I haven't been at a parliamentary committee, but I testified at the Listeriosis Committee in terms of everything that went down during that summer. So there's going to be a lot more questions to the Kielburgers because there is no chance that the Kielburgers, and I'm sure there's a ton of lawyers and a ton of PR wizards that have been hired since this whole thing went down. And I am not 99% certain. I am 100% certain that someone along the way has talked to somebody in the Prime Minister's office. So it kind of goes back to, the Kielburgers should have listened to the podcast 2 weeks ago when I said the only 3 rules of issues management, or the top 3 is don't lie.
Don't lie. Don't lie. Don't lie.
Don't fucking lie.
And like just on that last little point about partisanship.
So Chris, I just want to close up the parliamentary. I just want to close up my part of the parliamentary committee thing, Chris, which is to say, I wasn't saying parliamentarians shouldn't ask questions, and I wasn't saying they aren't going to get information that's important to know. I am saying it's not really a truth-finding exercise. Everybody on there, from the Liberals to the opposition, have a point they want to prove. They're asking questions to establish a point, not to find the actual truth. And so for anybody who this is their first exposure to the Kielburgers, this is an awful forum for them to have had to present themselves. Anyway, Chris, over to you.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you kind of made the point there around, a pox on everybody's houses, I guess, in some regard, because the amount of setup in some of these questions from Liberal members of, can you tell us first how fabulous an organization you are, and thank you so much for your service, and oh my God, like, please validate the fact that we made this morally just choice. Like, come on, like, it is, that is part of the game. I get it. And, in some regards, I cringe as well when I watch this thing and I see, okay, like, I'll admit it. I like watching Pierre Poilievre do his thing sometimes because he can just be a dog with a bone and it's fun to watch. However, sometimes, when I see folks talking over each other and whatnot, it's hard for me as a viewer, without having my political hat on, to actually see this as an exercise that actually gets anywhere. Which is where I think, we're seeing some more cracks today, but I don't think we've yet kind of got to the really nut of it. But I do agree with Jenny, though, just to close it off, that somebody said something to somebody at some point, right? And we just haven't quite figured out who that was and when. But it seems like there's something there.
Well, wait, but that's the core thing. So I think anybody that's listened to me on this pod or on Power and Politics on CBC knows that I am not trying to whitewash this affair, and I'm not carrying much water for the government on it. However, let me ask you, we have a lot of facts out there, from the Morneau money to the Trudeau speech money to the Kielburgers' financial issues, all kinds of stuff, all of which makes this look very suspicious. Suspicious of what? What is the allegation here? What's the alleged scandal? So
the alleged scandal would be that it's a bailout to some of their friends, right? If you look at some of the facts that were presented around these layoffs, where not even the board is even, allowed to see kind of what that is. You're seeing lack of financial disclosure internally. All of a sudden, oh, wait, we're going to have all this, problems internally. And then, lo and behold, this organization that's closely tied to this government gets this massive contract with a $43 million, bonus to them. That's when it starts to smell a little bit for me.
I agree. There is no one, the assertion that the Kielburgers were doing this out of the goodness of their heart and they were making no profit on that is that's another one that's just not true. And nobody believes that. And nobody.
Isn't that the definition of charity? I thought it was weird they were bragging about that. Isn't that supposed to be the case?
Well, this is the thing. How much out of their operating budget? Like, I think, we're talking about it's seemingly like a 10% of their operating budget seems to actually go to their operations for programming. and they're amassing.
But is it a Kielburger scandal or is it a government
It's
scandal?
both,
Like the Kielburgers, are they at fault here?
Well, listen, I think they've got issues separate that they're going to have to deal with to this government program. I'm sure they wish to God they had never tried to get this program, because that's actually opened up the scab that is what they've been doing in terms of their assets. But this is a program that absolutely could have been delivered by the bureaucrats. And the more you saw the Kielburgers today and their lack of understanding of the program, and you listen to their former board chair, who was treated terribly, like the Kielburgers would call her up and scream when she would ask questions. There's to me nothing that shows that, to what Chris said earlier, that they are actually the best organization to run this program. So if you're Ian Shugart, who basically sat there and said, yeah, this is good, how are you looking at the bureaucrats that have run the Canada Summer Job Program for like 15 years and administer 70,000 spots every summer to kids across the country? Like, it's completely laughable. So how then did we get selected? Because it's all, cabinet ministers were called. They obviously got a heads up. They were contacted about this. So how was we selected after all these red flags were raised? And there was only one way they could have been selected, and that is if every step of the way the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office said, nope, we are going ahead with this program. Nope, we are going ahead with this program. And so why did the Prime Minister's office
why does Mary Ing's name keep coming up? Why would Mary Ing be involved in this?
Because she's
the trade and small business minister, isn't she?
Yeah, well, Craig Kielburger, I think it was, admitted he reached out to her to speak with her about this program because the global brand that is We was initiated in Thornhill, and that's her riding. But my guess is it's probably more that they have a personal relationship and are friends.
Yeah, and they were involved. There was Ing and Chagger and Morneau were all sort of discussing this, right? So,
okay. Now, do we know? I missed. You both saw more of the testimony than I did. Do we know actually what this contract is yet? I mean, of all the weird issue management elements to this bloody story, tell me where I've got this wrong. My initial understanding was that there was a $19 million fee to We to run a $900 and some million program.
I think it was that, or
then
21.
Then before committee, Bardish Chagger said, inadvertently or advertently, I don't know, well, it was actually 43. And so then we thought it was 43 million for running a $900 and some million program. And then, was it yesterday, we learned that the program value was only $500 and some million. So now it was 43 million to administer a $500 million program. Well, the admin fees are going up pretty significantly the longer this story goes on.
Well, they said today there was no admin fees, program fees, no admin fees. And I throw that out to ask you, I don't know what the difference is.
I don't know either. Chris, what's the value of this contract?
$1 billion.
Gotta go like this when you say it.
Which is the number that Wayne Easter did not want anybody to say at committee today, because that just sounds like a big, hairy, bad number. Yeah, I mean, I think that's another one of the things here. This is part of the fog of war that gets people confused, right? But it's also like a legitimate question, right? So you had $912 million announced. And then all of a sudden you have another say, oh, no, but wait, it's actually like 500 and some odd million, which is supposed to apparently make us feel better because it's only $500 million. And then we're only taking 19 million, but no, we're actually taking 43 million. So that, again, just leads to credibility, and that leads to like, where is the money going and what is this all about, right? And then if you dig deeper on like, what does that actually deliver? It's like a less than minimum wage payment to students to get a virtual LinkedIn badge and to look at some videos. Like, that was one of the original proposals that they were having. Like, is that really, again, just even on the like delivery of the program side, is that actually real value for that huge amount of expenditure, and what is now a ballooning amount of, what are they getting off the top of this?
So I think it's fair to say that only the most sturdy defenders of the Liberal Party on Twitter believe that we know the full story right now about how this happened.
They're somewhat very few and far between these days.
But it's not that they think, no.
Yeah,
they're sorry, David, but they're not saying that we know the whole story. That's not the line on liberal Twitter right now. It's, how dare you? Like, and like, you don't like, oh, this is all just partisan, and oh no. Or they one person called Jesse Brown.
It's so surprising why the NDP don't care about the kids. You know, the Conservatives, I understand, don't care about the kids. But why don't the NDP care about the children?
Well, it's the Helen Lovejoy defense, right? Like, it's why won't somebody please think of the children? And like, and again, it's this like, my moral authority is stronger than yours, and don't worry about the details because I've got this for you. Like, there's no S on your chest, guys. Like, there are questions that need to be asked, and your smugness and your feeling like you are morally superior does not get you through this. Anyway, continue on.
So, the Prime Minister of Canada and his Chief of Staff are going to appear before this very kangaroo court Thursday. Would you have advised them? Both of you have been in a position of offering direct advice to leaders of your party. Would you have advised them to go in front of the committee? And what do you think they have to accomplish, Jenny?
Well, I think they're going to listen. I've said it before, and I'm not being. This never would have happened in any government I ever worked in, because none of the leaders I worked for would even dream of anything or be this self-righteous. What Trudeau's going in is to obviously deflect and obviously try to turn the narrative on this. He's going to, I think, stay the same way that this government has. To Chris's point, it's going to be, oh, the children, and I'm just so sad, and he's going to apologize again. But I'm not sure why they're doing it, because there is no more answers. He can't answer, like, unless Trudeau's just going to sit there and have all of the questions that no government official or the Kielburgers have answered in now. The program was canceled on July 2nd, so that they haven't answered in like almost a month. Unless he's just going to like throw it all out there, I'm not really sure what he's going to do. I think that it's going to end up being, I think he's going to dance. It's going to be a long, breathy opening statement. I've heard that the Conservatives are going to put Andrew Scheer in to lead the committee, and if I were the Liberals, I'd send a car over and pick him up to make sure he.
No kidding! Or why would they do that?
So
why would they do that?
I think someone said to me, "Well, he is the leader," and I'm like, "But he's actually not." So I think if they do that, that'll give a gift to Trudeau, because it'll turn it adversarial, and Trudeau will be breathy and for the children, and then throw out smug comments, or the Liberals will throw out smug comments about Andrew's expenses in terms of minivans and private schools, and the fact that he took a Challenger a month ago at the start of this. So I think that he will get away with that. I think that Katie appearing is going to be they will try to get into a lot of details. I think this will be the follow-up questions about who spoke to who when, and I wouldn't have recommended that she go before committee either.
Chris, your take?
Yeah, I see what their strategy seems to be, and I'm not sure I really agree with it. I think they're following a similar strategy of saying, oh, look, well, we testified, and whether or not anything came out of that, look, there was full disclosure, I'm sorry. I don't know whether that is wise. I do think it does give them a hammer to then say, this is just a partisan exercise, and won't somebody please think of the children, as they have constantly. Would I have actually advised him to do so? I think it could have been easier for him to just say, well, I'm busy, handling the business of the country right now and helping, millions of Canadians during COVID-19, than to play into this. So I don't know how wise that is, but there is seemingly a very deliberate strategy to defend the moral high ground here. And that's, they have a very hard time not doing that in this government, right? And it's the brand that they're trying to make sure is there of a caring Canadian who is internationally minded. And what's so bad about that? No matter how we get there.
Well, and this would have been if all of the skeletons within, this is why these two issues, though separate, are together, is part of the reason why this Liberal government is having a hard time going back to that knee-jerk position that they always have about everything, is that as all of these doors start opening into the inner dealings of all their corporate entities and all the real estate assets and what have you, it becomes very hard for this government. Was this government so I get that, people wanted to get money out the door and what have you, but they announced this program in April. It's not like CERB where now everyone's saying, okay, well, 5 million people are getting it that shouldn't be getting it because they just wanted to get the program funding out the door. There was enough time to do due diligence, and no one's believing that they didn't do that. They just didn't care. So the fact that all this stuff is happening with prevents this government from being as self-righteous and pompous as what they normally are.
And it also opens up to committee again, just to that one question of why do you
guys are having so much fun.
Why do you think this is the best and only? That one question alone, it just gives you so much ammo just to say, well, they're hiding from their own board of directors. They have this Byzantine structure. They have this, and this. Explain to me again, Mr. Prime Minister, why they were the best and only. So you're putting yourself at significant risk, which, not working for the Liberal Party of Canada is fine by me for now.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if nobody was going to get make money off of this thing, and they thought they were the best to do it, I mean, I don't know how much legs that has, Chris. I mean, so Trudeau appears on Thursday, and he survives it because he's up against Scheer primarily, and that turns it into a partisan face-off, and people remember that they like Trudeau more than Scheer when they watch it. And so he gets through that, has shown an unbelievable degree of accountability by appearing before the Finance Committee, and I'll say, and you can contradict me if you want, that none of the allegations, smelly as the whole thing looks, none of these allegations has been proven. None of them have been proven. And what is the process for proving them now? Once he's appeared before the committee, isn't this issue potentially over?
But what hasn't been proven, David?
Well, it has not been proven that it was not the bureaucracy that recommended this program. It has not been proven that it was not the bureaucracy that said we're the right people to run it. It has not been proven that there was any political involvement in any way in this exercise.
Well, there's been a lot.
It may be suspicious. You may have a hard time believing it, and I may have a hard time believing it, but there's no evidence.
Well, and that's what this government, I don't think, if they think that Trudeau, who I still agree, at least up until this point, and I've said it before, is still the best asset that the Liberal Party of Canada has, for what they for their party, they are not going to get away with not answering these questions. It's not going away. I think they thought this was going to go, this has now been going on for 26 days, a bit longer. There's no way the opposition is going to say, well, Trudeau didn't release a letter from Shugart saying it's the best program, and he didn't answer any of his questions. So, going to go home for the summer. It's not, this is a government that's not going to happen. So it goes back to when this whole thing started.
But the House isn't sitting. What do you do?
Well, the committees are still doing now.
Right.
The committees finance committee can stay doing that. And I'm not sure why they wouldn't. They should, and I expect them that they're going to do it. But this government thought that it would go away, and it obviously it's not for them. And I'm pleasantly surprised that it hasn't.
With throwing a body overboard ended for them?
It has to be a pretty big body. And who do you throw out? So people are saying, okay, well, it's Bill Morneau's fault. So why would he throw Bill Morneau out? What would be the actual reason? That he took an illegal trip and didn't pay expenses for it? Well, Trudeau has to look in the mirror on that one. His trip to the Aga Khan's private island was a lot more expensive than Bill Morneau's. What's he going to throw him overboard for having a personal connection with his daughter working at Well, his family now is in the excess of over $400,000 in speaking fees and expenses. So what would be the actual reason that they would throw Morneau overboard? If they wanted to do that, that would have been a while ago. They can't. They've dug themselves too big into this black hole.
Well, on the current fact situation, I think you're right, Jenni. On the current fact situation, I would agree with you. They would require a new fact in which they pivoted their position from everything was on the up and up, it was all the bureaucracy, to we thought everything was up and up, but it was that guy over there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Would that work for them if they did that?
Yeah, but
if there's new facts, sure. I think that right now, if they jettison a minister or somebody in their backbench, for this, I think that basically proves the case of the opposition that this isn't the best and only. I feel like it completely blows up their entire premise that this was the best, the only organization, and they're digging their heels in. And to your point, David, they're looking for the prime minister to tie a little bow off on this on Thursday, and the media will go, oh, well, that's everything, I guess, and hope that it's not necessarily, whether or not there'll be heat and light at the committee. It's whether the media decides, okay, we had nothing to see here and we move on, right? We've seen from the government that, they kind of do this by rote apology thing where they're like, okay, so I said these words in the right sequence, and people tend to go, okay, and then they move on, right? So I think new facts are needed. I think the work of the committee should continue. I think we need to keep digging because it does, when it smells, there's still something there, I think.
Jenni, I'd just quickly draw on your expertise from your time running at the top of the government. How much, at a time when we would like to think that our government is focused on really two things, which is preventing a wave 2 of COVID or preparing us for a wave 2 of COVID, and secondly, developing an economic and jobs plan that will get Canadians off CERB and back working where they want to be. At a time when that's what you'd hope your government would be working on, how preoccupying do you think this issue is for the finance minister and the prime minister?
Hugely preoccupying. I'm sure there's policy people still doing the machinery of government stuff. I'm sure there's still things happening in terms of policy development, or I hope so. I think health is probably still on that side. But for Trudeau, for Murnau, and for his most senior level staff issues management people, this is consuming 100% of your time. Like, I've been there. It is an all consuming stuff thing. And if you're a staffer who fully wasn't involved in this, you're also fighting ghosts, right?
So, Chris, I think the poll tracker or some data I saw, I don't want to cite any specific source in case I get it wrong, but the most recent data I saw showed that the Liberals were suffering and down likely as a result of the scandal. I think the survey was unclear as to the real cause, but we're assuming a cause and effect relationship. The Liberals are down, but the Conservatives are not up at all. The NDP and the Bloc are up, and the Bloc now have a significant lead in Quebec. What are the implications of this as far as you're concerned?
On the electoral map or just in general?
Yeah.
In
terms of the prospect of an election and how an election might go when it happens.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I don't know that this tells us much. Remember back in SNC-Lavalin days, we were both parties, the NDP and Conservatives, were salivating that this could mean big gains and this could mean a big thing. So campaigns still very much matter, and the government still has the ability to have a budget coming up soon to throw out all the goodies and remind Canadians about how we were there for them in a bad time and how we were the uniting force and, against all political odds. So, I'm not sure how much that matters as a moment in time right now. And again, I think, this is still, despite it being week 3, this is, I don't know, of this scandal, these things take a long time to really crystallize in people's brains. And I think the cumulative impact of scandal after scandal after scandal is probably what they need to worry about more than this one in isolation. What it means for the electoral map, I don't know. With the Quebec seats looking the way they are, I don't think that, the Bloc has any sort of motivation right now to move in any direction that is an election, despite them saying, oh, we'll do something in September. I think we're still a bit early to find out how this shakes out.
Jenni, do you think this makes an election more likely?
No, listen, I don't think, I just don't think I've said it before. I just don't think that, everyone is worried about, everyone is worrying about a second a second wave. You've got, as we say every week, there's more and more ramifications in terms of both the economy south of the border and here, which has an issue with us. We are a country that now has not had a budget in a year and a half. And as you find out more, like look at the accounting practices of any of the information that the government gave us on that program up to date in their very small fiscal statement or in their backgrounder when they released this program in April doesn't seem to be true. The numbers are just different. So I'm with Chris. I'm not sure electorally where we're at now. I think for the first time significantly, we have seen a decrease in Liberal support, which is kind of step one. And I think what you'll see is in close to 25 days, the Conservatives will have elected a leader as well. So you're going to have some stability there in terms of an opposition voice on the right.
As voters leave the Liberal Party, Jenny, why are they not default moving to the Conservatives, to the official opposition?
Well, I think they're just waiting to see what happens. I think it's, as I said, we have been essentially without a leader for close to a year. And so I think that for right now, voters who, I think you probably got two core voters. You've got the people in the 905, the suburbs, in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, who, might have a little bit held their nose and voted for Trudeau last time because they really didn't like Andrew. They didn't like Singh. And so they decided to stay with the Liberals. Those people are probably like, they're going to look more seriously at the other party. So whoever gets elected leader and Singh have to really step up to the plate once we're starting to get back. And then you're going to have the voters, the NDP and this is, the young guys that are upset still about the democratic reform promise from the 2015 election not being implemented. So you're going to have this core of young voters who are now looking at Trudeau because it's take away the we. He's now a leader who now has been, the shine started to wear off during his second term. I think that for that and for his global reputation, obviously, blackface coming out during the election campaign and the fact that, he dressed in it at least three times that we know of, that started it. And it's been the government's mishandling of issues. And on this one, seemingly lying about it.
And with that, just on that note around sort of the young people cohort, right? So, you classify them as the electoral reformers, but these are also a cohort that's gone through two massive economic shocks, the 2008 and now COVID. And they are going to be evaluating things based on, do I have a job? Do I have prospects? What does my future look like, right? So, that's going to be a compelling argument that the NDP is going to have to make because those voters are also going to be cross-pressured. They're going to be Liberal NDP cross-pressured voters in a lot of ways. They're going to look at this and go, I don't like this guy anymore, Mr. Trudeau. Yeah. But I do kind of agree with his values. Now, what future are you going to build for me, right? And so that's going to be an important part of Singh over the next little while, is really painting that picture. What does a future under a Singh government look like in the absence of, Trudeau's, posturing and things that people are getting tired of? It's not just going to be the moral smugness thing that's going to get them. It's going to be that pocketbook issue. I have an apartment that I can't pay for now. I can't, the job that I thought I would have for the next 5-10 years doesn't exist anymore. What does that mean for me, right? So it's an opportunity for Liberals, but it's also a huge opportunity for the NDP to be able to take some of those voters away.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to what both of you were saying, I mean, I think the government very badly needs a reset. Jenny, you better get your budget this fall. The government needs a throne speech and a budget this fall. It's been largely adrift. If it hadn't been for COVID came along and gave them an agenda. If it hadn't been for COVID, I don't know what the agenda of the government would be. And I certainly don't know what the economic policy of the government is, either pre or post-COVID.
Well, they had an opportunity.
That makes things like we stand out a lot more in the absence of any substantive sort of purposeful direction of the government.
Yeah, but do we think they want to do a throne speech and a budget this fall? Seemingly, I think Trudeau would never come back to Parliament. I think he's quite happy with how things are. He's quite happy with how things are being run. So the onus now is that the opposition needs to call on this. The NDP actually need to switch their position of not sitting, and because we do need this government to come back and go to Parliament. Yeah, they did have an opportunity. Morneau did in the economic update or sort of snapshot that happened in June, but they didn't take that. So there doesn't seem to be any desire on their part to actually communicate the economic situation to Canadians. I think you're right. I think they probably would like to go ahead without a budget before they're going to the election, because they're going to try to hide like the actual economic ramifications that the last 6 months have brought us. But I don't think they're going to be able to do that, because I don't think there's any universe where they can call an election, or we can do an election this fall, considering where we're still at. You still can't eat in a restaurant in Toronto, for example. I'm not sure how then we would administer an election campaign.
Okay. Now, I don't want to be seen as in any way closing down a debate prematurely.
Let us speak, David.
if anybody has anything more to say about we, do it now.
I'll wait till Thursday.
Yeah, listen, there's going to be a lot more to talk about. I've been trying to watch and follow a bit that has come out of the committee, and it looked like there's some more details about the We real estate holdings and corporate partnerships with Microsoft and what have you. So that gives us something to talk about for the rest of the week. And frankly, I've only got about 8 minutes before I have to go, because I have to get ready to go on TV, because of course we're taping this later than we normally do.
Right. So Jenny, I'll see you on Thursday on Power and Politics for a return cage match on We. How's that? I want to quickly get your take on what's going on in Nova Scotia, and that's probably all we're going to have time for the rest of today. So Paul Pango came on this show and told a story that, not to take anything away from We, is a true scandal. It is unbelievable what went on out there, and people lost their lives as a result of it. And holy Christ, it's a story. And like We, a lot of it's more suspected than proven. But there's a lot of curious facts around that. Given all that, and again, Chris, not to sideline you or I, but Jenny's been in the Prime Minister's office. When the federal government and the provincial governments decided to do this internal review rather than a public inquiry, why would they choose to carry the RCMP's water for them? Why would they choose to do what the RCMP did not do in the incident, which is put themselves in harm's way, and by taking the heat for the RCMP? Such a curious.
Are you going to
me?
Are you
they
going
didn't go
to
right
me?
to a public inquiry.
Yeah. I don't really. I don't really know. There's nothing to my knowledge that it was anything like this for the years that we were in government. But seemingly on the surface, it seems that all of this not having a public inquiry is to protect the RCMP, because there's so many questions now about this guy's background, and in terms of how disturbed he was, in terms of domestic assault and setting things on fire and hidden rooms now, and all of this kind of stuff. And there were a lot of speculation, and not speculation, media wrote about it, that there's a sense that he was an RCMP informant of somehow, and that this stuff had been brought to their attention, and they kind of turned a blind eye on it. And so then you turn a blind eye on a guy who seemingly is obviously he was an absolute like lunatic, like a dangerous person.
Monster.
A monster. And now the RCMP probably don't want to answer for it, but I'm not sure, based on the fact that there are political ministers in the government of Nova Scotia, and I'm sure there's a lot of MPs and MLAs getting a lot of heat on this from constituents, rightly. I'm not sure that these two governments cannot get to a place where this actually is a public inquiry of some sort. I just don't see how it can't happen.
Chris, do you have a sense of what the public interest might be in to not have a public inquiry?
Well, I don't know that there is a public interest to not have a public inquiry, right? I feel like
that's the question. What would be the argument?
I don't think there is one. Frankly, we have seen, over and over again, problems crop up with the RCMP, right? From, their work in Indigenous communities, with, how they've treated folks internally, with, how they police, communities of color. And I also think, the RCMP has been so tied to our culture and our identity as a nation, right? Everybody loves to see the musical ride and the red hats and the red jackets and the hats and everything, and they see that as, these are the friendly Mounties that that we are. That is a symbol of our nation, just like the flag on the backpack. And not to say that that isn't an important tradition, but I think having an open conversation about what happened here, having a public conversation about what happened here, helps to change that cultural conversation about how we think about policing in Canada and how we think about this institution. Because I think that for too long, we have had this embedded the institution itself has been so embedded in our culture that we're not willing to have these hard conversations around what their role should be and what, whether or not contract policing should be something that's happening in our country, whether they should have a bigger mandate, a smaller mandate. People, I think, hide behind, the big hat and the red jacket too much. And until we get there, until we get to that public inquiry, until we start really digging deep, we'll never change that conversation. We should be proud about how we go about keeping the peace and how we interact with Indigenous communities and how we invest in other things that aren't policing to ensure that we have better outcomes. We shouldn't necessarily have the badge and the institution necessarily be the point of pride. It should be how we treat others as a society through this institution that should be the point of pride. And I think we only get there after we have some form of public inquiry on when these things happen.
Yeah, I
So
think it's
Palango
100%. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say Palango thinks that if there was a public inquiry, it would be the end of the RCMP as the National Police Force. If you thought that and you were the minister, would that be a factor in your decision making?
Well, I don't think it can be. We're not going to know to the extent. Like if we're not going to know to the extent as to what what fully happened or what decisions are made or why they're deciding not to. Why they're trying to decide not to hold a public inquiry. So I don't know if that's a factor. That would be something I assume the RCMP is telling the minister that is probably the case. It's no different than bureaucrats trying to spin their side of stories and get ministers to agree with them. So I'm not sure we know that, and I'm not sure anyone can say that. But I don't think it changes the fact that there's a lot of families in Nova Scotia who lost loved ones in a very traumatic and terrible way a few months ago, and it's obvious decisions that part of those decisions was he was on the street and was able to commit all of those murders, seemingly even though he was a person of much interest to the RCMP, and we just don't know to what level of interest or what that interest was.
And maybe it should be
my last question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe it should be the end of the RCMP as we know it, and how it interacts with these communities, and how it functions, and how it works. Right? Like people throw these, it's the end of the RCMP. You should all be scared. People are going to, steal your car now, right? And there needs to be an honest conversation about policing. There needs to be an honest conversation about the RCMP's role in this. And there needs to be an honest conversation about how we fund policing at a level and how we fund the other things like mental health supports, intervention teams, and other things to ensure that we're not sending RCMP officers to deal with mental health crises. And so, when I hear the end of the RCMP, well, maybe it is the end of the RCMP of the way things have been going right now, given, the history of what we've seen.
Okay. Jenni, you got time for one more question?
One more.
One more, which is the Liberal caucus has been quiet as church mice, as near as I can tell, on social media in defending the government on we. And the Nova Scotia Liberal members, supported by members across the country, have broken with their government in the last couple of days and demanded a public inquiry as opposed to the review their government ordered. Is there something going on in the Liberal caucus?
Well, we've seen this in different instances with the Liberal Party. They don't have that much of a robust support of the backbench, and it seems that there hasn't been a cultivation by the Prime Minister's office in terms of dealing with backbench MPs, and they're a very vital form of a party, and a very vital form of a caucus. And it was for our government, it was one of the top priorities of Stephen Harper. And it's, for things like for cabinet bills, there were caucus advisory committees, which he started because it became evident that cabinet ministers were not, and I think I've said this before, were not consulting backbench MPs on bills, and he never wanted that to be the case. It wasn't that cabinet secrets were given out, but general direction on a bill. He wanted that discussion to happen before the bill is presented, and he's got a lineup of people in caucus that are standing up to say, well, we didn't know anything about this bill, and this is how it affects my constituents. It seems that there is no reach out. They don't seem to have anyone in any form of senior level or anyone that's, keeping in touch and making sure people are good and making sure they know who to call if they have issues. And I think it shows. Today was the only feistiness we've seen of the Liberals at committee. As I said, I think Wayne Easter called Mark Kielburger Marky at some point, and the Liberals were very much, for the most part, towing some form of line. But this has been the first time since this whole thing broke.
Does that make Craig the fun bunch?
The funky bunch.
If Mark is Marky, is Craig the funky bunch?
It's Marky Mark and the funky bunch, because this one smells still.
There we go.
This smells still.
Mark Kielburger looks nothing like Marky Mark.
No, they look like the twins from the Matrix movies.
All right, on that happy note, thank you both for joining us today. A very spirited conversation.
Thank you.
Chris, glad to hear you made it out of the woods. Jenni, go Habs.
Go Habs.
Go Habs. All right, till next week.